Hi guys, so the Scottish Labour MP and Shadow Secretary for Scotland spoke to Sky News about how Scottish independence isn't really a priority for the Scottish people. So let's hear what he had to say.
Do you think that Margaret Farrow should resign as an MP?
I think she should resign as an MP. I think she has lost the trust of her constituents, and I think in terms of the way that we have to deal with this global pandemic, we need to send out the message that people must comply with the rules, and for anybody to break the rules is putting people at risk. For a Member of Parliament to break rules in such a negligent and haphazard way, putting the lives and the health of workers at risk, and for people who work on trains and in Parliament, is really unforgivable, and we need to send out a very strong message that this will not be tolerated.
So if you get your way and she does resign, there'll of course be a by-election. What would Labour's position be on a second independence referendum in that by-election?
Well, our position is absolutely clear. The Scottish Executive Committee, which is the ruling committee of the Scottish Labour Party, passed and reaffirmed its position back in May, and that position is to go into the election next year against independence, as we always have been, and against the second independence referendum, and come out of that election with exactly the same position.
But if the SNP win the majority at next year's Scottish Parliament elections, would they have a mandate for another referendum?
Well, I think these hypothetical questions are something that we should be putting on the back burner during this global pandemic. Your first question.
Okay. So everything should be put on the back burner because we're dealing with the pandemic. So if the question was, should the Conservative government invest more in education? Well, we shouldn't talk about education now. We need to put it on the back burner because there's a pandemic. Should we invest more in green energy? We should put the investment of green energy on the back burner because we're dealing with a pandemic at the moment. This is like a ridiculous response. I've heard many responses to the question of Scottish independence from the Conservatives and the Labour Party and the Liberal Democrats. But the idea that, look, we're dealing with something at the moment which is massive, and, let's put independence on the back burner for the moment. Look, you can't respond to it this way. You need to respond to the request of the Scottish people. Now, he's going to come in a moment. He's going to come back in a moment with some statistics. I don't know if they're actually true or not, but let's hear what else he has to say.
Questions on whether or not an SNP MP would be spreading the virus across the United Kingdom by travelling to and from Parliament. And that's what the Scottish people want us to concentrate at the moment. They want us to go into that election knowing we have a post-COVID recovery plan. They want us to come out of that election trying to sort the economy, sort people's jobs and protect their livelihoods. And to consistently have these hypothetical questions. Keir Starmer has gone into the leadership of the Labour Party with his new leadership and said quite clearly that he wants to be leader of the whole of the United Kingdom in 2024. He wants to make sure that Scotland isn't independent, and he doesn't want a second independence referendum. So those are pretty clear positions. And I think all these hypotheticals we need to move on. It is not the priorities of the Scottish people. And if I could just very quickly say that in the recent poll, in the recent last two polls actually, a second independence referendum just made it into the top 10 when you added those who desperately wanted one to those who desperately didn't want one. So it's not the priorities of the Scottish people, and we have to concentrate on those, and that's what we're doing in the run-up.
You're sort of defeating your own argument by saying that it made it into the top 10. Now, it depends on who conducted the survey. It depends on what questions were asked. But you actually saying that it's not important. We need to focus on the pandemic. Your argument is actually defeated because many people view Nicola Sturgeon's response to the pandemic in very positive light. Many people realise that she has done a good job, a much better job than the government in Westminster. So you can say, yes, look, we need to stop talking about independence, we need to focus on the pandemic. But when the government, along with the Welsh government, but the government in particular, which is receiving much praise, and I'm not just talking about in the UK, internationally, for dealing with the pandemic, is the Scottish government, which is run by the SNP. If they were an absolute disaster, then you could say, look, Nicola Sturgeon has been ridiculed internationally because of the way she's dealing with the pandemic. Also in our In the UK, she's been ridiculed for the way she's dealing with the pandemic. Boris Johnson is held up as an example. Then you could have an argument. But the pandemic is actually demonstrating that Nicola Sturgeon's government is actually doing better than the UK government. And that would actually strengthen the question for independence.
Election, that's what we'll continue to do after the election.
You know, you can kind of criticise us for not asking enough about coronavirus, for asking about Scottish independence, for asking hypothetical questions. But I feel like the problem is that if journalists feel that they're not quite clear what Labour's position is in response to this question, then they're just going to keep asking the question again. Keir Starmer back in January said the SNP will have a mandate for another referendum if they win next year. He added, this is a question for Scotland and the people of Scotland. If there's a majority, it has to be looked at in Westminster. It feels as if you're not being straight. What would the...
Of course, because they don't, you know, back at the beginning of the year before the pandemic, support for the SNP was not as strong as it is now. So they probably believed, look, let Scotland have their, you know, there probably isn't sufficient support for a referendum at this stage. So it's easy for Keir Starmer. Also, Keir Starmer was not party leader at the time, so it was easy for him to say, yeah, Scotland can have their referendum. Then he became party leader, and his position changed, which doesn't actually reflect very well on Keir Starmer. You know, when I'm a backbencher, or not even a backbencher, front bencher, when I'm in a particular position in the Labour Party, my opinion is X. But when I become leader, my opinion is Y. Now you can criticize me for criticizing him over that, maybe because he has more responsibility. He needs to have a wider view of the party. But it is confusing if someone in the party says, yeah, the party's position is X, and then a few months later it's Y.
Position B.
Well, this isn't a fight for the Labour Party to have. We won't be in power at Westminster come May 2021 unless there is some kind of general election before then, and I doubt that will
happen. So you don't have a view at all on something that is such an important issue?
And therefore, Keir Starmer has been pretty clear. He wants to take forward a constitutional convention that looks at a federalist state across the United Kingdom. He wants to look at how the House of Lords operates. He wants a new constitutional settlement going into the 2020.
Okay, but this is Keir Starmer's position for 2024. If the SNP win a majority next year, not in 2024, they're going to start the mechanism for independence. Like, it's all good and fine talking about federalism if you win in 2024. And maybe you will win in 2024. We can't predict what's going to happen. But Scottish independence will have already started the wheels will start turning before 2024. So it's a bit pointless talking about federalism or whatever after 2024. But I want to take a step back here. I think Labour's position is completely wrong. And Labour should be a bit more Machiavellian in a sense when they're dealing with this. I think the Labour Party should actually say, the union is strong. We believe in the union. This is the UK Labour Party, not the Labour Party in Scotland. Or the Labour Party in Scotland will do whatever the Labour Party in the UK will tell them. But they should say, we're unionists. We believe the union is strong. And we believe the union is strong enough to deal with a second referendum. Now, they probably don't believe that, but they don't have to believe that. What they can do is say, yes, the Scottish people want a referendum. Good, give them a referendum. We believe the union is strong. We believe the people will vote for the union. Now, what will happen then is if there's a referendum and the Scottish people vote hypothetically for the union, then Labour have said, see, we were right. But if they lose and the Scottish people vote for independence instead, then the Labour Party just have to say, well, this is Boris Johnson's fault. We said the union was strong, but Boris Johnson messed it up. He was the Prime Minister. He messed it up. We supported the union. Now the Scottish people have voted to be independent. We now need to work with the Scottish people going forward. We need to respect their position. We as the Labour Party want a good relationship with the Scottish people going ahead. They could turn it into a political bonus for them. If it wins, they can take responsibility for it. See, it won. We were right. The union was defended. We were on the winning side. Of course, Boris Johnson would take most of the credit for that if it did happen. But the Labour Party could say, yeah, but we were also on that side. Now let's move to something else. Now let's move to a federal United Kingdom or whatever. But if it loses, if they lose in the sense that independence wins, then they can just say, well done to the Scottish people. We will respect their choice. We want to work with them in the future. This was a failure on Boris Johnson, by Boris Johnson. Boris Johnson gave away Scotland. He should be punished for that, but we want to work with the Scottish people. This is my position. And I think if the Labour Party went ahead with that, went down that road, I think it would benefit them. This idea of, well, the Scottish people aren't interested, or, let's have one position one week and then we change it the next week because the leader has changed, is not a good way to approach this issue. And it just creates confusion in Scotland, because if you ask the Scottish people, what's Labour's position on independence? Some will say, well, they support independence because they said, well, they support a referendum, not independence, but they support a referendum. Some will say, well, they don't support a referendum. It creates confusion, and who will benefit from that? Your political enemies, the SNP. If you have a clear position, then people will either agree or disagree, but it will strengthen those who agree with you. But I still think that this approach by the Labour Party is a disaster. And I also think the Conservatives are also peddling in the same sort of political response as well. The idea that, yes, the union is strong. The Conservatives' position is slightly different. They say the union is strong, but not strong enough to survive a second referendum, which is ridiculous and absurd. If you believe the union is strong, then you say, let's go ahead. You should be actually calling for a second referendum because you think you would win. The people who are saying the union is strong, but we can't have another referendum, don't believe the union is strong. Because this is my challenge to anyone who's saying the UK is strong. Scotland doesn't need another referendum. People voted in 2014. That was done and dusted for a generation. Even if that was true, if you believe the union is strong, you should welcome another referendum. But I feel that most people who are saying we don't want another referendum don't believe the union is strong. They don't believe Boris Johnson is strengthening the union. The fact that Boris Johnson, when he went to Scotland, he was basically smuggled in under the cover of darkness and smuggled out. He had to hide his location. He didn't want people to know where he was staying. When he did actually do photo ops, it was in Conservative constituencies, places that were friendly to the party. He didn't go into enemy territory. Why didn't he go into places where the people disagreed with him to convince them that the union is beneficial to them? Why he didn't? Because he knows that the union is weak at the moment. He knows that those people despise the Conservative Party, and there's nothing he can sell them. Let me know in the comment section, guys, what you think. As always, your comments are greatly appreciated. Thanks a lot. I want to say a big thank you to all of my patrons. You ensure that this channel continues to exist. I'm eternally grateful for all of your support. If you join Patreon, you will receive instant access to our Discord server, where we have both audio and video chats. You can chat with me and other patrons, where we discuss important and non-important issues. Becoming a patron per month costs about the same as a large coffee, so why not check it out?